Senator Seaworth's motion is that the Senate notes that the Morrison government's 2021-22 budget left people on low incomes behind. I would go further, because this budget leaves the whole country behind, and that means it leaves everyone behind. There have been massive increases in debt in the last 12 months without the necessary data, objective data underpinning it. That shows, yet again, poor governance over our country. I've discussed with the Chief Medical Officer and Senate Estimates and the Secretary of the Health Department the 7 essential components for a plan for managing a virus. The government is addressing one, state governments are addressing another. That's it. And they have been addressed poorly by both the federal and the state governments. I want to discuss the productive capacity, because that's what determines the wealth and the security, the economic security, and indeed sometimes the defence security of our nation in the future. The productive capacity of our country has been declining considerably since 1944, and in fact since 1923, if we want to get into basics, but that's for another day. Let's look at the most important part of productive capacity, the human asset, our people. Look at education, because it's the future leaders of this country that will determine the future productive capacity, as well as us determining that capacity today. We have declining scores in education, reading and writing, mathematics and science, declining by world standards. We are falling well behind in the core aspects of education. But we devote plenty of resources, plenty of time, plenty of energy to gender fluidity, teaching kids, misleading kids about gender fluidity. Critical race theory, non-gender language, a national curriculum that the government forks out money for and yet cannot control what's in. That's what's been told to us by the federal government. We need charter schools. We need parents to have more say in the running of their schools and principals to have more say in the running of their schools. Parents to control what values are passed on, and parents to decide whether or not their children will be taught about gender fluidity. And I want to compliment Mark Latham in the New South Wales Parliament and my colleague Senator Pauline Hanson for the bills that they are introducing and evaluating right now to restore the values and common sense to education. And I note that Singapore, Japan and Korea have really moved ahead in recent years, as has Taiwan, and they all have solid basic education. What's happened to apprenticeships in this country? Senator Lyons moved a motion today with regard to apprenticeships sadly lacking in WA. Senator Hanson has introduced an apprenticeship scheme, proudly introduced an apprenticeship scheme that the government has taken and refurbished and expanded. Such was the success of her suggestion on apprenticeships. What's happened to universities? They followed our primary schools and high schools in becoming more woke and driven by anything but education. And as for university education, it is now just pushing an ideology. Our TAFE systems have fallen into disrepair. Our trades qualifications are falling into disrepair. Let's move on then to the workplace. The Fair Work Act is an abomination. It is about that thick in terms of pages printed. It destroys the employer-employee relationship, which is essential for productive capacity. It is difficult for anyone, an employee or a small business employer, who doesn't have access to lawyers and consultants and HR practitioners to work their way through that. How can they possibly be held accountable for that relationship when they can't even understand it and never will understand it? Not because of lack of intelligence, but because of lack of time and surely being overwhelmed. Again, just like education, this is poor governance to let this get into this state. Then we go to energy, arguably the most critical in terms of material resources, because energy has determined the competitiveness of every country. Under President Trump, America reversed its decline in competitiveness because it reversed its increase of energy prices and it started to decrease energy prices again, became more competitive against its competitors. And America blossomed because of that. President Trump created more jobs than any president in history because of that and because he cut away regulations. This government, its predecessors, have fiddled with the renewable energy target, destroying our baseload coal-fired power stations, our grid. The network costs are destroying our grid, making it unaffordable. Retail sectors of electricity, just a fabrication. The national electricity market is now a national electricity racket. It's not a market at all. It's a bureaucracy that's interfered with and manipulated by bureaucrats looking after vested interests. And then we see privatisation. The Queensland Labor government is now taking about $1.5 billion every year from people who use electricity, businesses, small businesses and families. And that is now a tax. We have taxes on electricity. Why is it that the Chinese can produce electricity and sell it for 1/3 the cost of electricity sold in this country when they use the same coal as we do? They take it thousands of kilometres, burn it and sell coal-fired power to their consumers, and it costs us, we sell it for 3 times as much because of regulations that come out of both sides of this parliament. Then we look at water. The Murray-Darling Basin is being gutted, communities being gutted, regions being gutted, and nothing is happening about it. Today, we passed an amendment to restore compliance with the law, with the Water Act of 2007, with regard to water trading. It was supported by the Labor Party, denied by the Liberals and Nationals. They don't want to comply with the Murray-Darling Basin plan. Went down to the lower house, and Labor changed and sent it back here in cahoots with the Liberals and Nationals. That will continue to destroy water allocations in our country, because it will continue the corruption and the likely, apparently, very confident of saying the criminal activities going on in the Murray-Darling Basin with regard to water trading and the abuse. Then we see property rights, fundamental to running a farm, fundamental to running a business, stolen capriciously under the Howard Anderson government in 1996, and then progressively with Labor premiers from Queensland and New South Wales jumping on the bandwagon to steal farmers' property rights. Why? To comply with the United Nations Kyoto Protocol of 1996. That's why. And farmers have lost the value of their land. And then we see that extended in Queensland, for example, by the Queensland state government, relying on bogus claims about the reef to lock up land. We then see the federal government enacting carbon farming, where vast tracts of land, good farmland, are now laid waste and abandoned and taken over by feral animals and noxious weeds. And the costs of managing them as they spread around the country fall on their neighbours' properties. This is another example of poor governance. The lack of infrastructure in water, the Bradfield scheme crying out for investment. And then we go to the most destructive system of all in our country, the Australian taxation system. In 1996 and 2010, Jim Kalali was the Deputy Commissioner of Taxation for Large Companies and International Matters. And he said on both occasions, 1996 and 2010, 90% of Australia's large companies are foreign-owned and since 1953 have paid little or no company tax. They use our resources, use our people, use our assets, use our defence forces, use our police forces, use our education system and pay nothing in return and just take. The Japanese, by comparison, have in their large companies 2.5% are foreign-owned. The American and the British figures were about 12.5%. So who pays for these foreign companies to use our assets and to make money without paying tax, company tax? The people of Australia pay for that through families paying taxes, through individuals paying tax, through small businesses paying tax, and some large Australian companies paying 30% against their multinational competitors who don't have to pay that. How can we possibly compete? And then we find out in late 1990s, early 2000s, and I've asked the Parliamentary Library to update this figure, that a person on the average income in this country pays 68% of their income to government. Government is housing is not our largest income, not our largest expenditure in life. Government is, through taxes, rates, fees, levies, charges, supercharges, special charges. Joe Hockey admitted when he was Treasurer that 50% of a person's income is taken in tax. He said people work from January through to end of June to pay for government, and then they keep what's left. Well, the actual figure, when you take in government charges as well, and rates and levies and fees, is 68%, which means that people are working, someone on the average income is working from Monday through Tuesday, through Wednesday to mid-morning Thursday to pay for government. And then they keep what's left from the 2/3 of Thursday and Friday to pay for their entire life, their retirement, their education, their food, their shelter, their car, their transport, their entertainment. That is not fair, and it shows poor governance. And I haven't got time now to talk about attempts to reform taxation, but both parties, both the tight-old parties, have shown a reluctance to invest energy and political will and sheer guts. They lack the integrity to tackle tax reform, comprehensive tax reform. I mentioned infrastructure a minute ago. What about projects like the Richmond Agricultural Project? What about the Hewenden irrigation project up in Hewenden? What about things like the iron boomerang, which would transform our country and make it the most cost-effective and largest producer of steel? Give us enormous security for our manufacturing and for our defence. And then we have things like that tap onto that iron boomerang, things like an inland rail that's being destroyed by the Liberal National Government, inland rail that is being sucking up resources and coming up with something that will be far worse than the existing installations, especially when we consider the blowout in the costs. Again, lack of data, lack of sound planning. The inland rail on a proper route through to Gladstone would be part then of a proper national rail circuit. So, Madam Deputy President, I submit to you these points that show and prove that the government here has not only left the poor behind, as Senator Siewert points out, the government has put additional burdens on the poor. The government has put a regressive tax on the poor in terms of energy prices. Energy prices are increasing alarmingly, and the poor have to pay a higher and higher and higher proportion of their income on a fundamental, which is energy. And then the poor pay for it because they lose their jobs when our manufacturing jobs, some of our agricultural processing jobs, some of our agricultural jobs are exported to China that uses our raw materials, gas, coal, to produce electricity far cheaper than we sell it for in our own country. So we're losing out entirely, and we lose out in the diminishing of our security, our defence security. So I certainly agree with Senator Siewert that the Morrison government's 2021-22 budget has left people on low incomes behind. It has left people right across the country behind. It has left Australia behind. Thank you, Madam Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator.